Okay, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sure I think there are a lot of people who are interested in this particular topic that we're going to discuss today. Before we dive in, I'm Suresh Madhuvasu, managing partner with Product 10X Accelerator, and we are the accelerator who focuses really on the product-led growth on the SaaS startups. We've been in the um, inspiring entrepreneurs and founders for the last 4 years, and we've learned a lot of lessons by now, and that's really where we want to kind of really discuss today with our panel experts. I'm joined today by Jogi, who is one of our founding partners with Product NX as well, and then Sushant, who is our general counsel. So before we dig deep dive, Jogi, if you can provide a little bit of quick introduction and then followed by Sushant, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Suresh. Again, good morning, everyone. As Suresh just laid out, we formed Product Annex to address the PLG-led uh, concept in terms of where startups and other entrepreneurs struggle quite a bit, and we continue to see that as a challenge. Just to briefly share about my background, I've been a serial entrepreneur for past 25 years and built and scaled multiple companies over time. And we clearly identified the need little over 4 years ago during multiple brainstorming sessions that we had. And that's what led to the founding of Product NX. And I'm glad to be part of this conversation today and look forward to some great session.
Thank you, Jogi. Sushant.
Absolutely. Thank you, Suresh and Joki. Um, I am a New York licensed attorney, and my practice is focused predominantly in the startup ecosystem. So, what that means is I work with founders who are looking to take their idea and scale it. I work with advisors contributing their subject matter expertise to the startups, and then I work with investors who are looking to deploy their capital into promising opportunities. uh, Working with Product 10X as general counsel has been a phenomenal experience. I've been lucky enough to be involved since our early days, all those years ago, and it's been really um, rewarding to see the progress that we've made, that you, Suresh, and Jogi have chartered, and I'm glad to be part of this journey.
Absolutely. So, Sushant, let's think through this, right? I think for today's conversation, I think it is beneficial for a lot of founders to really think through as to say, go through the journey of I have a great idea. Now I want to launch my company. And sometimes, I mean, people build and launch and then launch and build. I think, for whatever purpose, let's say I have a great idea. I want to launch my company. And then, once I launch my company, I want to build my product, build my IP around that topic. And then I want to kind of, really scale my operations to the next level, right? So let's have that kind of segmentation of the discussion for sure. And one of the things that for today's discussion we will focus on is definitely about the SaaS companies, non-hardware, because I think there are some nuances where with the non-SaaS, especially with the services or even the hardware companies. So those are the not the ones that we are really experts on. I think that should be a discussion for a different day. But today we will purely focus on SaaS as a delivery model, AI-based companies, and then any vertical is fine, but that's really the discussion area, right? So with that as a context, Sushant, the probably Jogi, you've been involved with a lot of founders right from the inception when they are thinking through on how to even think about bringing the right business models, right? Can you talk and probably if you have any insights on how should we be really thinking about one on more of building the company point of view, as well as probably Sushant can provide the legal angle as well.
Absolutely. Again, that's the fundamental question that any entrepreneur our founder kind of goes through at the initial phases. And again, having worked with Sushant very closely over this past few years, we kind of continue to run into where there are experienced professionals who are trying to get into this, or even entrepreneurs who have run successful companies, who obviously can make a difference between one entity form type versus the other entity type, and also how they are able to address their whether it is their co-partners, or whether it is in terms of other employees that they would like to reward, what is that structure. So we always kind of took the good counsel of Sushant to address some of these. And Sushant, I think based on some of our experiences, we always felt like every company has to go through their own in terms of what that thesis is, to be able to structure it in a proper way. Maybe, I mean, if you could kind of talk to us as to what are the differences and implications for various business formations, that would be
Sure.
helpful.
Absolutely. Happy to talk about that, but just a quick note. I just wanted to provide this disclaimer that, the topic of our discussion is for informational purposes only. I would urge everybody to not construe this as legal advice. And, everybody's scenario, situation is different. And I'd encourage founders or folks listening to this to, hire either their own legal counsel or reach out to us should you have questions about specific topics or issues so we can give you tailored advice. Having said that, um, typically, in my experience, when founders are at this ideation stage, there are three questions that they normally need to address. Those three being: what entity type should I have? Where should I incorporate, meaning which state? And what arrangements should co-founders be thinking about and discussing? So when we address these three, starting with what entity type, we generally have in the US, few different types of corporate structures that are available for a company. You may have heard of, an LLC, S corp, C corp, even a B corp. And there are implications both with respect to growth and expansion plans and tax implications that are unique and different to each of these different entity types. So, to understand which is the right fit for you, just by way of example, if you're a company looking to have a local footprint, looking to address the market in your geography, maybe an LLC is a better fit for you. But if you are, somebody looking to scale, onboard investors, really take this company, to new heights, perhaps even go IPO at some point, then a C corp may be a better option for you to consider. So that's the first question that founders have to grapple with: which entity type. And then the second question, after you've identified the entity type, is where to incorporate. Now, different states across the US have different pros and cons. Delaware, as we've all heard, is a very popular jurisdiction, but is it necessarily right for you? I mean, if you're a Colorado-based business trying to attract state or government contracts in Colorado, maybe incorporating in Delaware does not make sense because oftentimes state contracts require you to be locally incorporated in Colorado in this instance. Then there are other, privacy may be important to you. You don't want your information or information of other founders to be publicly available. There are certain other jurisdictions that have more robust privacy practices. So having a conversation about that helps us identify which jurisdiction type is right for you. And then the third question at this ideation stage is: if you're more than one founder, it is always imperative for you to have a clear, sometimes difficult, but oftentimes, helpful to have that clear conversation with your co-founders, just so that, your roles, responsibilities, rewards, all of that is streamlined and discussed, right? Hey, okay, we are doing this together. I am bringing the money, you're bringing your subject matter expertise. Does that mean we both take equal equity in the company, or do you think, an alternate structure is better? Should we all take equity today, or should we think about a vesting schedule to ensure that we are all incentivized to work for the company? Those are some topics that bear discussions.
That's amazing. So, Sushant, one of the common thing, especially with the tech founders, I would say, is this, right? Initially, I have an idea. I probably have some prototype, or I have a working software that I then the question always becomes, is going to be, I don't really know if this is with the C. And probably that seems to be the easiest one somebody could do. And then they figure out, oh my goodness, you know what, now I need to go, okay, this is doing good, and now I need to go raise money. And then now everybody's, let's say, asking for C Corp. And from your experience, I think, at that initial stages of really for a tech startup where they are planning to sell everywhere in the US, and probably they don't want to be constrained by, let's say, a single state or whatever. What would be your advice to say? Is it, should they be starting right the day one with a C Corp or a LLC?
That's a very good question, because oftentimes startups are cash strapped, right? They want to keep their overheads low. And LLC seems like an attractive option because it does not have this double taxation that a C Corp has. Simply said, an LLC allows for what is called pass through. So the LLC only reports taxes, but the individual owners or members of an LLC pay taxes on their individual tax reports. Compare that to a C corp, where the C corp pays taxes at one level, and then the owners of the C corp or the shareholders pay taxes on their portion of ownership. So oftentimes people say, hey, I don't want to pay this tax twice. I'd rather just start off more streamlined as an LLC, and then we'll figure things out later. But that figure things out later comes back to bite them sometimes, because it's easier to start off with a clean slate, as a C corp, as compared to converting from an LLC to a C corp later. Because with conversion, what happens is your company was formed as as an LLC, excuse me, did some business, generated some revenue, has a valuation now, and then you have to convert into a C corp, meaning the owners of the new C corp have to buy equity into the newly formed company. If you buy equity in an LLC this is just formed yesterday, I mean, there hardly is any valuation to the LLC. It's, maybe $100, $1,000. So to buy 50% of $100 company, you just give them $50 and you get 50%. But now, when at conversion, the LLC has been around for 2 years, 4 years, maybe it's done, 100,000, 300,000 in revenue. To buy 50% of a 300,000 company, you have to put up
Right.
150,000. So that's oftentimes something that founders don't fully appreciate, and fair enough. I mean, it's a complex, nuanced detail, but that's something to bear in mind. Is if you convert at a later time, you can't buy equity at the same price as you would in a newly formed company.
Gotcha. Yeah. So taking the clue from that, I think, the one thing at Product 10X we have definitely seen is there are typically times where we have multiple founders with a company, but at the same time, there is always this question that comes up: should I be distributing my equity equally? Are all the founders the same? And again, I think one of the uh, I would say nuance over there is not all founders are equal at the end of the day. And some founders take, or rather, one particular founder takes a lot of weight and the baggage. And that's how we have seen a lot of our startups at Product 10X, right? And every single one of them appreciates that, because yes, I think they all came into that particular vision with a specific idea. I want to do this, but at the same time, to your earlier point, Sushant, somebody would have come up with the idea, somebody with the technology angle, somebody with the sales angle, or somebody with the investment. And now the question really is, on a daily basis, on every single day, who is impacting what, and that becomes a huge point of contention if somebody doesn't really think through the day one. And because at the end of it, as you are going through years or months or quarters, all those small discussions kind of weigh you down, because you always think, oh, you know what, I should have had this discussion with my co-founder previously. I didn't have, because it's not a comfortable discussion for anybody. And in those segments, can you talk through a little bit about, from a legal structure point of view, how do you, or rather what have you seen that kind of works out well, more from our own experience point of view? And then where are the places where you would suggest founders to come through and discuss them in a amenable way, I would say.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to add to that, Sushant, is also, as a any corporation, you got to have your regular meetings, cadences, and again, in terms of what is the legal implication for certain things, or how do you kind of follow through, whether it is your minutes of the meeting that you captured. Most companies, we know that they don't do any of these things, though they all know that this is part of the checklist. But again, I think if you can just also address that as part of how a company should their own upkeep in terms of everything that happens.
Absolutely. Suresh, that is oftentimes a difficult conversation for founders to have, right? For them to sit down and say, hey, your worth in the company is not as much as mine. And nobody wants to say that. Nobody likes to hear that. So that is where, having access to an attorney, having them be part of that conversation helps, because they are presenting the view of the company, right? Like when I'm engaged as counsel to a company, I'm representing the company. I'm not representing the founders. They're not my clients, right? My client is the company. So I have to at all times ensure that the interests of the company are put for front and foremost. Having said that, there is no one size fits all. So I have seen situations, arrangements where founders come together and say, "Hey, one is the money bag, right? Like one founder provided the capital that makes everything possible, while the second founder came in with the idea and has the chops or the expertise skills to actually execute and take this somewhere." So, in those scenarios, one way to think about this arrangement would be, hey, you're providing the capital, and we acknowledge that, in exchange for which, we'll give you 30% equity. We are going to drive this further, maybe the other founder or a couple of founders, and they'll take like the remaining 70%. But we'll give the capital guy who's getting 30% the entire 30% on day one, because he's already delivered, he's already put the money up. Whereas for the other two founders who are now going to execute, we'll put them on a vesting schedule for the remaining 70%, to say, hey, you have to now ensure that you continue working in the interest of the company. So we're not going to give you the 70% on day one, because otherwise you might just put your feet up and say, hey, I got what I already wanted, why should I work? Well, no, you have to earn your 70%. You'll get the 70% over an increment of 4 years, for example. That is one way in which you can balance the interests of both sets of founders. That's and there are different such options to think through, and different founders, different companies have different approaches and different appetites for these kinds of discussions, so we can talk through those. And then, Jogi, to address your question, yes, it is important to have regular meetings, to be in compliance with state and federal requirements for these companies. Just because you've incorporated does not mean that's the end of all your obligations. You have to continue to have annual general meetings for shareholders, for example, or periodic board meetings for directors. We certainly, as part of Product 10X and my role as legal counsel, we advise our portfolio on those compliance requirements to say, you have to, these are the meetings that you need to be conducted. Here are, how you maintain meetings of the minutes of the meetings, excuse me, and how you kind of like ensure that you are compliant with all the regulatory frameworks that apply to you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the one aspect I think I always think about this meeting minutes and distribution of the tasks after anything major that happens. Many of the times people think of it as, oh, you know what, it's a burden for me to kind of keep these minutes and all that. But actually I would argue the other way, which is if you don't know the results that you are supposed to bring in, the outcomes of the meetings, and then if you don't have everybody on the same page within your company, then that is a bigger problem internally, rather than, I mean, don't think about this is for some kind of federal compliance or state compliance kind of thing, but this is all really for you, right? Once you kind of change that mindset, it actually helps to kind of internally communicate everything internally, make sure that everybody's on the same page, and that communication is really for that, right? And I'm sure, I think, you can tweak these internal meetings for the complaints related issues and whatnot, but otherwise, for the founders, it's really important to really think of it as for your own good, rather than really thinking of it as a burden on its own.
Correct. And you should incorporate that as standard practice, in your operations. Why? Because it helps you, as you said, Suresh. Like sometimes, hey, you want to go back to a discussion you had 8 months ago. If you don't have minutes of the meeting, you don't know what exactly was discussed and agreed upon. Or hey, you maybe want to bring on another member, another investor. They can quickly just review these books and know what the company has discussed, what they've approved, which path they're heading down on, and vice versa, right? If you want to say onboard somebody or take a loan, or as we discussed earlier, convert from an LLC to a C corp, um, having all these decisions documented, and having a resolution passed of the board saying everybody was present, voted in favor, just avoids troubles down the line. One, the state, if you want to convert, is going to want to look at that. But more importantly, Suresh, to your point, you don't want somebody else saying, hey, you never discussed this, I never okayed this. I known, I would probably have gone a different way. Well, no, I mean, here you have a document to exactly show everybody was aware of this and consented to this action being taken.
Yeah.
Completely. Again, I think, one of the things that we need to be careful of is, of course, I think, during the probably, let's say, first 6 months of the year or first 1 year of your startup, these things may not matter as much, because it might be, one or two people or three people who is really kind of, executing that. But this is actually a good in-house practice that we all should be developing, not when there is a problem, but then we should all be doing this as a part of the standard practice, just to make sure that, we have the right set of things happening within the company, right? So
I always, sorry,
yeah,
sorry. I always tell my clients to think of it as, insurance premiums. You're paying the premium as, hoping to never have a problem. But if there is a problem further down the line,
you are
you're
covered.
glad you have that insurance coverage. You're glad you have
Absolutely.
these documents in place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Jogi, I think, to kind of get to the next set of things for us, let's say now, yes, I've launched my company, I've kind of, set up, I've talked to my co-founders, I have a kind of good mental model for me to operate the company. And I've been in the industry for about a year and a half, and now I'm bringing in talent. I mean, I got some investments, or I put in my own money, whatever that might be. I have some money that where I need to bring in talent so that I can scale my building of the software or the product, or maybe even the sales teams. From the talent angle, how do you think about, um, as somebody who is really close to a lot of our startups, and then the venture companies that you are building, how do you really think about the talent for the startups in general? What kind of talent do you kind of really think through? There is always this whole challenge of how much now it's all about hybrid, but then is it kind of near shoring, offshoring? I mean, who should I really bring in? Is it an executive or a doer? I mean, there are a bunch of discussions that keep going through. Would love to hear your insights on that whole talent management angle. Sorry, Jogi, I think you might be on mute.
Sure.
Yeah.
So again, a great question, Suresh. And like for any conversation, talent is the centerpiece. And certainly, again, I'm glad that this is part of what we wanted to kind of understand from a legal standpoint as well. And again, this is something that we suggest within our portfolio and outside as well. We constantly suggest the entrepreneurs or the founders or the firms as well that they need to be conscious about what who they are bringing in and in what format they would like to onboard these folks. And constantly we talk about whether it is full time, somebody is fractional, somebody is part time, somebody is functional, that you are able to bring in as an advisor, as an influencer. But and how do we structure that? So, I mean, at the critical level, it's important to understand. I mean, what is the organization structure that you're looking at? Where does the folks complement each other within the organization, and see which needs are kind of critical that you are able to own them, or like they are full time with you. And other skills or like other aspects of the business, where whether it is a legal counsel, if the company can't afford or doesn't see a full-time need for that, can they outsource that or work on a fractional basis or on a part-time basis? And that's where I think, Shushant, obviously you have kind of reviewed hundreds of similar agreements, employment agreements or contractor agreements. And I think your if you can just share how a company should be going about it, may be extremely helpful.
Sure. A lot of times, companies that are at this stage, right? They've incorporated and now want to put together systems and processes and want to bring on talent to support those. Um, they don't, they want to incentivize these people that they're bringing on by giving them skin in the game. You hear people talk about employee stock options, incentive units, etc. But sometimes before you give that, before you offer that to a prospective employee, you may first want to make sure that they are the right fit for the company, because once you give them equity, I mean, they have it for life, right? So that's a consideration that sometimes gets overlooked, is either having a probation period in place, or maybe just start off with an independent contractor relationship. And once you understand the workings of this person you've brought on, or the person feels comfortable and wants to in a more fuller way engage with the company, you can have a conversation about being on payroll, and being a full-time employee. But there are different ways to do this. And of course, with that, as you mentioned, Suresh, in today's world of hybrid work, there are other considerations also to keep in mind. It's oftentimes attractive for companies to hire talent in certain geographies where the prevailing wage is lower than, the New Yorks and San Franciscos of the world. But with that comes its own set of registration and compliance requirements, whether internally in the US, if you're hiring somebody in a different state, you have to register as an employer in that state. Or if you're hiring or offshoring some of your work, just being mindful of employment and labor law that may apply to you. These are things that founders should be cognizant of when thinking about bringing on talent from across geographies.
Yeah, thank you, Suresh and Sushant. Great conversation, and connect shortly with you both.
Sure, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So, Sushant, from that angle, right? One of the things that I always look for is talent. Initially, is of course, one is the talent management angle that we need to think through, but especially in the earlier stages, it is really about the value somebody is providing to the company, right? So, what it means is it's super easy for somebody to promise a lot, saying, hey, I can do these 10 things, 20 things, I can do great business development, and I can bring you, $5 million contracts in the next quarter, which is great. That's what we definitely need. But then when they come in, for those kind of people, let's say to your earlier point, you've given the equity, or you may have done some payments or whatnot, and then you realize in the course of time that they haven't delivered, right? So one of the things that we are very vocal about is, if somebody is not working out for you, then it is very important for you to have that right conversation and then see the next steps. And those next steps could be that either you are keeping the person in a different role or different capacity that they can contribute, because again, it's really about the value that somebody is generating. If you don't really see a place over there, then again, very important to say, hey, things are not working out, I think probably we should revisit our relationship at a future point of time. And that kind of discussions, those kind of discussions are very hard, clearly. But then what happens is, people kind of postpone those discussions, because they might be like, oh, you know what, maybe not this month, maybe he or she will be able to kind of provide the value in the next coming months. And then quarters go by, years go by, and then you are sitting with a bunch of people who are not contributing, who are not providing value. They are frustrated that they are not able to provide the value to the company, and then the company is not growing, you are not growing, and then it just kind of comes in a full circle. And that's exactly the reason, I think, where your point of, make sure to review the value that somebody is bringing in. And then from the comp structure point of view, there are several creative ways. Again, no one size fits all. But are you trying to provide the equity? Is it more of a cash value right now, or is it a mix of equity plus cash value? And do you want it more as a outcome basis? I mean, there are so many ways that you can think through. And don't make decisions in haste. That's really the most important thing, right? It's like, once you do it, once the contract, legally binding agreement is done, that's there forever.
absolutely. And not only just review these different arrangements, but communicate them, have them in the contract. Sometimes, you know, there's a proverb, right? Penny wise, pound foolish. Like, you want to use template employment contracts or independent contractor agreements that you see online. You're like, I mean, we don't need to hire a lawyer. And that may be true, if you are, if everything is standardized. But say you want to bring on somebody and have clearly defined KPIs or deliverables, it is important that you document that in some form in your employment contract, maybe as an exhibit. The reason is exactly why, what you laid out, Suresh, that later, if they're not delivering or if they are not able to perform um, in conformity with the KPIs, then you have a basis to let them go, and without them alleging that you were discriminatory or unfair. Um, Recently we had a scenario with another client who was onboarding some talent outside the US, particularly in the Philippines. And Philippines has very robust employee protections, very labor law that's employee friendly. And there, unlike the US, you can't have employment at will. That's a very US centric concept where you can hire somebody anytime, you can fire somebody anytime. You don't have to have a basis for firing. But there you have to have notices given to the employees. You have to have opportunities given to the employees, meaning you have to say, hey, these were the four things we expected from you. You've delivered on two, but not on the other two. We're putting you on warning. We're giving you 6 more months to amend or to improve your performance. And if after the 6 months you still fail to, then we will have to release you. But you can't release them without giving them that fair warning and an opportunity, which all has to be documented. So it's just some things that in that instance, like the US employer, it's just a foreign concept to them. They didn't know about all these things. And it's these nuances that oftentimes you're like, we don't need to know, or we don't care to know right now. We just download standard template documents and use them. That may be a source of problem later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's a good point because at this point, right now, there are so many online services that are coming up. On the surface level, it might be just like, hey, you know what? No, this is just $20, let's say, template that I have. I mean, why should I go and pay attorney, $200 or $500, whatever that they are charging? But it's really about, I think, you are paying for the expertise, not for the template, right? At the end of the day, and those are some of the nuances that people should be thinking through, because you don't want, I mean, a startup for all of us is really your dream come true, right? That's really where people are putting in their blood, sweat, and money, and you want to make sure that you are doing the right things. You don't want to be, of course, I mean, all the time paranoid about, maybe what if things go wrong. That's not definitely, that's not the way we should be working on. But doing the right things, making sure that we have the right set of legal agreements, contracts, because whether you are looking at the bootstrapping your company, or even bringing in the capital from outside, a good in-house management of the legal, commercial, financial aspects is always a good thing. And that's really the point of the discussion for today. So,
Yeah.
Sushant, one of the things that we've definitely seen with our own portfolio in a way is, how do we really provide the equity to advisors, right? When I say advisors, um, again, just going back to our earlier discussion of, you have so many people that you need to take help of, and when we are building a company, and that's the right way to do. There could be, sometimes it could be product advisors, it could be the go to market advisors, it could be the people who have the industry access. They believe in your product, in your vision, and they want to provide the right access to the industry experts. One common mistake that happens is, a lot of founders bring these advisors, or rather the so-called industry folks, as their on the retainer, on a monthly retainer. And then you realize that after 3 months, after 6 months, you're not getting new value out of these people who are there on the retainer. And rightfully so, when you think about the value somebody is bringing in, let's say if I come in and tell you, hey, I'll bring you some introductions, my introductions is only directly proportional to what the network that I have. And then I may bring in 5 introductions, 10 introductions. After that, I'm out of it. And it's not as though that, even the best of the influencers out there, they are bringing in people each and every day. So that's one of the nuance that people often don't think about, when they really work with the advisors. But can you kind of talk through on some of the frameworks that we need to be thinking when we bring in advisors, and then how do we kind of really compensate them?
Yes, actually, in this scenario that you mentioned, and it's common, you have advisors, and they have finite networks. They have only so everybody, each of us has only so many people that we know and we can talk about. Uh, so in that instance, perhaps maybe a transactional arrangement is the way to go. Just have a hourly compensation model. They provide access of like 8 hours, 10 hours a month, and you pay them for it. And after that, once they've exhausted their networks, or you think you've gained all the value that you could from their inputs, from their contributions, then that relationship comes to a close, instead of an equity based arrangement where now 8 months, 10 months into the engagement, yes, they were bringing a lot of value to the table for the first few months, and you were happy, and didn't mind giving them those shares. Now they have those shares, and that they're continuing to get more shares without actually continuing to contribute in the same way. So that may lead to either some discontentment, or just rethinking whether that equity based arrangement was
Is
the
the right
right.
thing to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, which is again, I think this is to say, based on the advisor that you have, the kind of value that you're expecting from them, be cognizant of these things, right? For example, if you have a product advisor, and the idea for you is each and every time that I am building a feature, I want this advisor to come in, give their critical feedback on how I'm building the feature, or how this feature could be useful for the users. That is a continuous value that you might be able to get, because you are building the features every single month, right? So that's one path. Versus, let's say, hey, you know what, I want investor introductions, for example, right? Investor introductions is a finite amount of time. For example, in the next 3 months, I have to raise my money, and then I need the introduction. So for the next 3 months, it's a time bound. Make sure that you are getting the value out of this particular advisor for these 3 months. And then after that, I mean, based on what the expertise is and then the value that they bring in, you may keep them, or you may have them as your supporter of your company. But those are the things that you need to really think through upfront. And don't get too excited about, oh, you know what, I have this great advisor, he or she is an influencer, and then they are bringing everything to me. I mean, that's not the way to think. I mean, make sure that it's really about the value creation for the company that you need to be really thinking through.
Exactly right.
Right. So I know we are almost coming to the end of our conversation in a way, Sushant. But I want to kind of, really, as a last part of our conversation, fundraising is a very critical angle for all the startups, right? And we've seen within our own portfolio companies, sometimes um, founders have a certain structure. They may not be really thinking through on, what is the cap table structure looking like. Why do, let's say, CEO has 20%, whereas the other co-founder has 50%, and now investors are trying to understand why is that so? Why is CEO and the co-founder has 20% and then the other co-founder has 50%? And then in a very naive way, I think, founders don't really understand what does it really mean, because when you think about, from the investor's point of view, you want the CEO to be that decision maker who has the right amount of equity so that they can take the company in the right direction. But maybe internally the founders are not really thinking that way, right? So I think for the part of this discussion, can you please think through and then provide a framework on how should we be really thinking about that equity and the cap table management? That's the precursor. And then let's say now I'm really trying to kind of start my fundraise effort. What are some of the things that I should be thinking through before I even go and start the fundraise effort?
Yeah. Now this is a very important piece, right? Because founders, often you're so close to your company that you kind of like, lose sight of the outside in perspective of how somebody who doesn't know your company as intimately as you do uh, perceives operations, and may have questions about, the setup, the arrangements, etc. So always, and this is where I think product NX excels, right? Like, we help companies get fundraise ready, and by doing that, we in doing that we help them, button up their internal operating processes, and also put together the different processes and systems, so that they look like a, well-oiled machine to a prospective outsider or an investor in this instance. So some of the things, like you mentioned, are cap table management. Sometimes companies don't even have cap tables to show. I mean, this should be, something that you should absolutely think about before going out and pitching your company to anybody else, right? First thing they'd want to see is, okay, who's running the show, who owns what. Before I come in and I put more money into it, I want to know where things stand right now. So having that cap table, and having that cap table reflect intelligently, the reality. If a CEO, if somebody is hands on and really managing day to day affairs, then the cap table should reflect that, and give them that proportional equity in the company, as opposed to a passive investor. Um, a passive co-founder, for that matter. It looks odd if an advisor has 25% and a co-founder has 15%. That just
Yeah.
raises questions from an investor standpoint. And then the other things also, some of the other things to think about before fundraising are, beyond just your cap table, do you have the other basics in place? For example, have you thought about trademarking or patenting your idea or SaaS product here? You know, that helps in, one, increasing your valuation, knowing that you have something unique that others can't replicate. That increases the valuation of your company. Second, it also gives prospective investors confidence in your company. So, because otherwise I'm putting in, as an investor, money into your company. What is to stop somebody else from just stealing your idea, replicating the same thing, and making that successful? And my investment has gone down the drain then. I want to see that your idea is protected in some way. That cap table, these are some of the other things that you may want to think about from a fundraising standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the cap table management is not as simple as saying that, oh, you know what, no, I have all the founders in a spreadsheet, or pulley kata, whatever that is. I think, of course, I mean, that's more of a mechanics. But to your point, Sushant, as to say, I have, let's say, these two co-founders, or five co-founders, or six co-founders, doesn't really matter. But it is very important to make sure that, yes, on the cap table, everybody is sitting on this equity. And if one or two of them are sitting on the equity and doing nothing, for example? How do you want to be able to explain that to your investors? And how do you make sure that it's not just about the talking to the investors, for example, but it is really for you internally, right? Because you don't want to be the one or two people who is slogging in the company to actually kick your butt off. You are spending your midnight oil, working over the weekends and all that. But whereas two other founders sitting on the equity, they are not contributing as much. Those are the ones, as part of the cap table management, when we think about it, it's really much deeper than that, right? I mean, again, putting something on the spreadsheet, I'm sure we all can do it in an easy way, but it's really about how do we want to make sure the reality comes to the true. That is one part. The second one, of course, when you are going in front of the investors, is really about, do we have the right documents? Do we have the right contracts? I think, Sushant, from the legal point of view, that's also super important, to make sure that whatever software agreements, the licensing agreements that you have, all those have the right legal backup, correct?
Absolutely. Your vendor contracts, your partnership agreements, even your employment agreements, they need to have those necessary clauses in place, like liability, limitation of liability, disclaimers, etc., to protect the interests of the company. Because an investor is wanting to is wanting to see how their investment is going to be protected, and their investment is only protected if the company is protected in the right way. Otherwise, if you're subject to a suit, all of their investment and your other assets could potentially be exposed. And I think, to your earlier point about the dead weight on the cap table, making sure that everybody is contributing the same way. Actually, that's a beautiful way to kind of like bring this a full circle, because we started off with saying, have that you know uncomfortable but important conversation with your co-founders at the beginning,
Yeah.
because now you've incorporated, you've built your structures, now you're looking to scale by bringing on investors. You've probably been in business at this point for 2 years, 3 years. You've slogged your tail off by working and to get this company to this point, while your co-founder probably did not contribute as much, but is getting the same rewards, is going to get the same equity. So that's not fair. And so, but then there is very little you can do at that point, because you've already contributed, you've already brought this company to this point, the valuation of the company is what it is, and the other co-founder, even though they're not contributing,
Yeah.
has an equal share of that valuation. You have no leverage at that point to negotiate or renegotiate the terms of your co-founder agreement. They've already gotten what they were supposed to get, which is why, again, important to have that conversation at the beginning, so all the expectations are discussed and clear.
Absolutely. So the one add-on that I would say to that is, yes, I think it is definitely important to start at the beginning, but also it is important to reevaluate that as you go through, because life changes. I think there are life events happen for all of us, and if so, it could be for somebody, baby coming in, or somebody is getting married, or somebody personally, things happen at home, and anything can kind of come in as that natural event that happens. And at that point of time, it is only fair to kind of come through, sit together, have the discussion of, hey, you know what, if we are not able to provide the same value to the company, then it could be either you are buying back the shares, or probably voluntarily they are giving up some equity. But again, that's really one of the core aspect of, I think, when we started the discussion about forming the company, you want to really have those people who you completely believe in, right? And where you can have those open discussions, open channels. And it's not just about, oh yeah, we are good workers, but I think the building startup is beyond work time, right? You should be able to kind of even text over the midnight oil, early mornings, late nights, whatever that is. That's really what it takes to build a startup. And if you don't have that comfort zone of interacting with the co-founders, then it just doesn't really work out, unfortunately, right?
Agreed. It's not a one-time event. So when we talk about, incorporation or even these shareholder agreements, we have to ensure routinely that, people are following through on those promises. And that is where, when we were discussing with Jogi, having those periodic board meetings, having those, annual general meetings, that gives you the opportunity to do a check-in with everybody to see if everybody is performing the way in which they're supposed to, if changes need to be made to arrangements, or if we need to revisit some of the earlier structures in place. That, those are good opportunities, those board meetings, to have those kinds of, conversations about past performance and future expectations.
Absolutely. Sushant, I know we've come to the end of the time here. And I'll say this, I think, again, just to be super clear, right? Building startups is hard. I think, every founder goes through a lot of it when they are building the companies. And then what we have definitely seen is legal expertise or thinking something on the legal terms is not something that naturally occurs to founders as the first priority. But the idea really is whenever you are unsure, it's very easy to kind of go on to Google or rely on your founder friends to get some advice, which in sometimes may be okay in the short term. But if you are really thinking about that long term aspect of your company, and then looking at building the company the right way, definitely you want to think through some of these nuances and intricate details, and have somebody by your side. I think that definitely helps a lot, right?
Yes, I will close with this example, right? I once had a client come to me saying, "Hey, I signed this agreement with this consultant, but now the consultant, uh, it's not working out. We don't want them to continue, but they're claiming that they can get unemployment from us. They should be getting, all the other benefits and privileges that an employee is supposed to get." I said, no. I mean, if they're a consultant, if they're an independent contractor, they're not entitled to that. I asked the client to review the agreement they had in place. They just had an employment agreement that they'd signed with the consultant, not knowing it was an employment agreement. They'd gone online, the client just downloaded, a hiring contract and signed it without checking,
Wow.
with legal or anything. And now they're on the hook for, all these withholdings, federal, state, unemployment. They have to give them health insurance, etc., all for, an independent contractor, just because they use the wrong form. I'm not saying you always have to, hire a lawyer to draft these things. Even if you have a form, if the client had just quickly checked in with me and said, "Hey, is this the right agreement? Can I use this?" That would have, prevented a lot of these issues that they were now grappling with.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Sushant, I know there is so much of value that you provided in different topics that we went through. But thanks a lot for your time, and I'm really looking forward to kind of really help the founder ecosystem as Product 10x, and then I think for everybody to build great companies in the future.
Thank you so much, Suresh. This was
Thank
great.
you. Bye bye.